Good morning, church family. Glad to have you here today. If you're in person or if you're online, we're glad to have you tuning in here today. And we're continuing our Radical series. We're getting towards the end of it, actually. Every year around this time, we do a small group study leading up to Easter to get our hearts united around a common core thing, to get us fired up and ready as we go into Easter and the most important part of the Christian calendar, the Resurrection Sunday, where we celebrate the core of our faith, that Jesus rose from the dead and then we can have a relationship with Him. So as we've been looking at Radical, I know it's been a struggle, raising some questions for some people, but I think as I've talked to many of our group leaders, we have about 20 small groups, both online and in person, going the past 5-6 weeks here, and they've really found some great conversation. As I've been having conversations with people in general, it's just people are awakening up to these ideas and realizing that we don't have time to waste. We've got to be radical in our faith. We've talked about this, that the goal of this series is to take us back to the fundamental aspects of Christianity and challenge us to consider whether our lives are built solidly on the foundation of Jesus or other things. Radical often is used as an extremist term. That person's so radical. But really, at the core in its definition is the fundamental nature of something. And we've covered many topics: radical sacrifice, radical giving, radical compassion, radical urgency. And the question has been the same every single week. Are we really what we call ourselves to be? Are we really what we call ourselves to be? A picture that kind of came to mind this week was, I've got things in this wheelbarrow here, right? I've got these two things here. Now, you would call these both swords, right? But they're very different, right? I mean, this is a plaything, right? This is a toy, and this is a sword. If I actually want to do something, I'd have to take the actual sword, not the play sword, even though they're both fun. I've got these. This shovel's really nice for my little 2-year-old to use and play with. But if I actually want to dig something or scrape some ice, I got to use this, right? This is maybe the coolest one here. I've got the electric guitar. Actual real thing. I can make some really cool music out of this if I wanted to. And somebody found me this. I'm really excited about this. Let's see if I can get the... Yeah, I don't know if you can hear that. So, it's really fun. I could play around this for a long time. But the point is, if I want to make real music, this sounds like a dog. It's really fun for a kid to play with. If I want to make real music, I got to use the real guitar. As we look at those, the question that keeps coming to mind for me is that: are we really what we call ourselves to be? Are we really what we call ourselves to be? Again, both of these things would be called a sword. Both of those would be called a shovel. Both of these would be called a guitar. And yet only one of them actually is of value for what it was created for. And so today, as we continue this journey, I just want us to be thinking that and asking that question. Today, we're kind of concluding the next 2 weeks of this series. We're talking about radical abandonment. What is abandonment? It's to yield oneself without restraint or moderation. We often think restraint and moderation are a good thing, but abandonment is to yield oneself, to let go of oneself without thinking about restraint or moderation. And today, we're going to look at this by looking at half-hearted faith and wholehearted faith. I know being half-hearted is something that's common vernacular, right? But being half-hearted in our faith, or wholehearted, we're going to look at a guy named Caleb in the Old Testament, and he's somebody that represents this to a T. It's actually said of him multiple times, and even by God, that he was wholehearted in his faith. And the question, again, that we want to ask is, are we really what we call ourselves to be? Are we truly, truly abandoned to the will of God? And so I'm excited to look at that. As Pastor Robin said, if you want to turn to Numbers 13, and if you want to put your finger in there in the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, and then Joshua, if you want to put your finger there, Joshua 14. We're going to be taking a look at those together. So let me pray as we dive in. Well, Lord, we come to you today, and we just ask that as we study your scripture, as we talk about these things, my words aren't going to change anybody, but your words can, God. And so we come to you today, and we just have open hands and open hearts, and we just ask that you would speak to us, you change us, you transform us from the inside out. Wherever we're at right now, whether we're in this room or we're online, I pray that you, Holy Spirit, would be doing your work. We welcome you here. It's in your name we pray. Amen. little bit of background before we dive in. The nation of Israel, from the beginning, they had gotten to this point where they were in bondage in Egypt for many years. And so we watch out of the book of Genesis, they ultimately are ending up in Egypt. They're stuck in bondage. And then the book of Exodus is the story of how God called Moses, the deliverer, to come and to deliver the nation of Israel through the power of God and the 10 plagues and all of that from where they were and to lead them out towards the promised land. So as that happened, as they were led to the promised land, the journey is them wandering in the wilderness and then coming to this place where they were there on the edge of the promised land. And God told Moses to send 12 spies from each of the tribes into the promised land to check it out, see what it looked like, and to see how they could make plans to take it over. And as they did that, the spies came back. 10 of the 12 of them said, "It is true, it's amazing, but we can't do it. We can't do it. It's too dangerous. We can't do it." Only one lone voice, and then later joined by the other, but one lone voice of Caleb, who was later joined by Joshua, said, No, we can do this. We're supposed to do this. God called us to do this. And they stepped into that point. And so that's where we pick up the story. But we're going to look at this and just look at some symptoms of what a half-hearted faith looks like, and then symptoms and ways that we can have a wholehearted faith. So let's start. What are some symptoms of a half-hearted faith? The first is this: that safety and comfort become more important to us than God's mission. Safety and comfort become more important to us than God's mission. As I said, they come back from their exploration, and then in Numbers 13, 27 to 29, they gave this report. They said, they gave Moses this account. "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan." It's interesting how they say this. It's interesting how they phrase when they come back from the land. There's an interesting statement. They start with, "We went into the land to which you sent us." You see, they're saying, like, Moses, you sent us in to check out this land. We came back. It is beautiful, but it is too dangerous. We can't do this. The interesting part of that is this is not something that Moses chose. It's not like Moses woke up one day and he's like, "Hey guys, we should send a couple people in there to check out the land." Like, God came to them at the beginning of chapter 13 verse 1. It says, "The Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites." This was a command of God. God sent them in to the land in order that they would take this over. This was the plan, and they were supposed to go in there on His command. Yet, notice how they try to de-spiritualize the exploration. "Hey, Moses, you sent us into this place. It was your fault, right? And so we went in there, so we have to figure out something different because it is not possible. It is way too dangerous for us to get in there." The obstacle in front of them became bigger than the mission of God. The obstacle in front of them became bigger than the mission of God. As one commentary says, they look on the presence of these other nations as an insurmountable obstacle to entry, not as a confirmation of God's purposes. So many times we're living with a half-hearted faith. And when that happens, safety and comfort become a significant part of our equation when we're deciding how to live our life. And there were two quotes from the reading and the Radical book this week that really stood out to me about this. One of the statements that David Platt says, he says, "We say such things as the safest place to be is the center of God's will. We think if it's dangerous, God must not be in it. If it's risky, if it's unsafe, if it's costly, it must not be God's will. But what if these factors are actually the criteria by which we determine something is God's will?" Another quote, he says, "The danger in our lives will always increase in proportion to the depth of our relationship with Christ. Maybe this is why we sit back and settle for a casual relationship with Christ and routine religion in the church. It's safe there, and the world likes us there." It's pretty powerful, huh? Maybe this is why we sit back with a casual, half-hearted faith. It's safe there, and the world likes us there. And those two quotes strike at the center of my own walk with God. How many times have I considered safety and comfort as the main thing in the midst of my daily decisions instead of being on mission for Jesus? I look at the world right now and it feels more urgent. There's a growing sense of honest persecution as Pastor Enosh was here for a while and he's back now in his home country. There's many other people that we know around the world that are in their countries of origin. That honest, true, difficult persecution is happening in those places in the world. But as we look at our own country, there's glimmers of persecution and silencing even beginning here. I've talked to people in our own church that although it's not persecution, they've talked about how they've come to terms where they either have to decide to follow the direction they've been given by their bosses, or they're going to be fired for standing up for their beliefs. There are situations like that even here within our own church. Beyond that level of persecution, though, there's small ways that we often default to safety and comfort instead of mission. How many times have I seen an opportunity to bless someone and passed it by because it might be awkward? How many times have you seen opportunities to pray for someone or share resources with someone or ask a tough question or respond to a cry for help, and yet the safety-comfort equation comes up in our minds before the mission of God? It's a question that has become all the more urgent in this past year because of COVID. And without trying to be divisive or stir up needless controversy, it doesn't matter where you're coming from on the spectrum of what you believe about this past year with COVID. My great fear has had little to do with that as much and more to do with what the idea of safety is going to do to our souls going forward. We, our young men's group, Foundation Builders, we were studying Celebration of Disciplines recently, and we looked at this discipline of study yesterday. And one of the quotes from that book was interesting to me. It said, "Repetition regularly channels the mind in a specific direction, thus ingraining habits of thought." When you repeat things over and over and over and over again, it can't help but form us. It can't help but change and start to ingrain habits of thought within us that are hard to change. So one of my great fears this past year, aside from all the things that we've struggled with and all those that have been ill and all that kind of stuff, has been the greatest word probably at the forefront of our conversations is about safety. Safety. All the times in the news or wherever we're at, it's always about safety. And I just wonder if even the repetition of that word and that idea on a constant basis is starting to infect our souls, where radical faith becomes more distant from us because we are so focused on these things. I think that's going to potentially be one of the long-term consequences that's greatest of this past year within our faith journeys. It can lead us to this place where unintentionally, even if it's a right thing at that time, it can start to infect our souls, where we start to have this idea that safety and comfort are the first thing. Because, you see, God never tells us to be cavalier or unloving in any situation, but He most definitely does not call us to a life of safety as our highest priority. Safety is not bad. It's just never meant to be the highest thing on our list. So we have to look at that. Are we people that prioritize safety and comfort higher than the mission of God? Secondly, a half-hearted faith, a symptom of that is that we discourage others from taking risks in their faith. So the spies come back. They start to tell this story. They start to say, no, we can't go in there. It's not going to be safe enough. We got to stay here. It's more comfortable. Maybe we even go back to Egypt. It's easier back there than to go forward. And then they start to spread a bad report amongst the people. In verses 31 to 33, it says, "But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are.' And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, 'The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them.'" So they've gone from reporting the facts. It's difficult. It's going to be a difficult journey. And now they're starting to get to this point where they're trying to persuade other people. So it goes from facts to hyperbole. They start spreading a bad report, it says. And so, they start to even say the land devours those that get into it. And it's almost like this lifelike imagery, like you're going to step across the border and the land's just going to swallow you up. The words mean to eat its inhabitants. Like, this land is dangerous. It's kind of like, I don't know if you have this in your house, but occasionally I'll be upstairs and Janelle's downstairs, and all of a sudden I hear this scream. And I'm like, what's going on, She's like, oh, there's a spider down here. It's like a foot long. It's got huge fangs. It's going to jump on me. It's super fast. And I go down there, it's like a tiny little spider, and take care of it, and it's fine. But it's kind of like that, Like, hey, it's going to eat its inhabitants. It's crazy. Like, we can't go into this land. It's going to destroy everything. He even compares the descendants of Anak, some of the people there, to the Nephilim, who were the demigods of the earliest time in history. He says, we look like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Then in Joshua 14:8, it even says that, as Caleb is describing this, he says, my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. That's the kind of people that they were at the time. Their reports, they were intentionally trying to make the people's hearts melt with fear. And not only were they scared for their own safety, they intentionally discouraged other people from taking risks in their faith. Have you ever seen that in yourself or somebody else? Isn't it interesting how when we don't want to be uncomfortable, instead of like just not being uncomfortable and letting other people do whatever they want, we try to make those people not be uncomfortable either so that we don't have to do what they're doing? And that's often how it works. And there's a lot of people, some people are more intense about this than others. Like, there's some people that might call themselves realists, but we all know that they're really pessimists, And they tend to see the negative in everything that might happen. I know I've been around some people like this in my life where they're going along in their life and we're discussing something as a team or something, and we're looking forward to the future and trying to dream about things and having faith for the future. And some of these people, I love them to death, but some of them might be the ones that kind of come in and say, like, no, I can just see all the wrong things that are going to happen here. I can see all the reasons this isn't going to work. And there's something interesting that happens when there's somebody like that, where everybody kind of is like, oh yeah, you're probably right. It's not going to happen, right? It's not just them, though. I have to ask myself the question. We all have to ask ourselves the question, how do my words come across? Like, do I encourage the faith of other people, or do I often have a half-hearted faith that discourages the hearts of other people, that puts them in this place where their faith isn't encouraged but discouraged? The third symptom of a half-hearted faith is that we grumble and complain when situations seem difficult. I mean, you can read it, but they proceed in 14, and in Numbers 14, they proceed to complain and grumble against Moses and against God and say, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? I mean, the people even consider going back into slavery in Egypt as a better alternative than stepping forward in obedience to God's direction. And one of the symptoms of a half-hearted faith is a consistent pattern of grumbling and complaining. I remember a distinct season in my life when I recognized a pattern of grumbling in my spirit. It wasn't anything massive, but just a daily grumbling. I'd go through my life, oh man, it's just so tough and so busy. Oh man, it's been so difficult. I've been wrestling with so many things. And just constantly, that's coming out of my heart and out of my life. And, not to you or to me, we shouldn't just bury those feelings. That's the exact wrong thing to do. But I need to figure out, and in that season, I had to kind of go down into that. God, what is this? Like, why do I keep grumbling? And I started to realize it was the symptom of a half-hearted faith. I wasn't giving myself completely to the purposes of God. I was holding on to something, and it's tense, When I'm open to God, I can just walk forward in freedom. When I'm trying to hold on to something here and also hold on to God, it's so tense, it's so hard. It makes everything feel worse. It's like trying to dig a hole with a play toy. If my life just looks like this, I'm trying to dig a hole with that. That starts to get difficult to do, and I don't have the strength, and so I start to grumble and complain. So that's the symptoms of a half-hearted faith. Grumbling and complaining. That there's safety and comfort as our highest priority. That we even discourage faith in other people. But what does a wholehearted faith look like? Well, number one, we are men and women of boldness. We're men and women of boldness. We see this in the life of Caleb. If you look at Numbers 13:30, I love this. Like, he's coming here, they're talking about, like, we can't go into that area, we can't go into the promised land, it's going to be too difficult, there's giants there, the land's going to swallow its inhabitants. And in 13:30, it says, Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. He's like, hey, everybody quiet up. Like, we are going to do this, and not only are we kind of going to do this, I'm not just saying, yeah, we probably will do that. He was certain that it was going to happen. When you're someone of wholehearted faith, giving everything to God, you can speak and act with boldness. He's bold not because of himself. It's obvious when you look at this passage and the Joshua passage that his confidence does not come from his own strength. It comes simply from God's promises to him. Because, he is confident about who God is, he can speak confidently about what God will do. Because he's confident about who God is, he can speak confidently about what God is going to do. It's kind of like if you're doing a home project and you're trying to find a person, or maybe you need a mechanic or something. You can tell the difference between somebody that has a little experience with somebody, because somebody might be like, well, I've tried a couple spots, But then you find that one person, hey, do you have any ideas? I'm trying to do this house project. And they're like, dude, I got this guy. That guy, right? He's the best. Like, he does amazing work. Here's his number. Here's his business card. You got to call this guy. He's amazing. It's kind of like that with God. When we're confident about who he is, it's easy for us to be passionate and to share that with other people and to be bold, to say, this is what he's going to do. He's proved it over and over to me. He's going to do it in your life as well. And we give ourselves up to God completely, we can step into this new territory in our life with boldness. We're no longer double-minded. It doesn't mean that there's never going to be questions, but we don't have to try to do the mental equations all the time. When we look at our life, we're not trying to balance, Justin, the pastor, and Justin, the dad, and Justin, the person over here as my individual self, and my identity over here, my identity in what I do and who I am and what I'm about. I'm not trying to juggle all those things as a husband and a father. I stop all of that and the juggling of everything, and it's just, this is my life for God, and everything else fits into that. And my identity is rooted in him first and foremost. When we can do that, then our whole job in life at that point is just, okay, God, what's next? Where am I going next? What's next? How do you want me to serve my family? Where do you want me to take me next? What's next? I'm ready because I know who you are, and I'm going to step out in boldness to the future. Not only that, but wholehearted faith in people leads to encouraging faith in other people. We encourage faith in other people. After the Israelites complained, they said, we should go back to Egypt. This is awful. Why did you do this to us, God? Why are you doing this? And then all of a sudden, Caleb and Joshua in verses 5-9 in chapter 14, they tear their clothes. It's a sign of anguish for the people. And they say, guys, if you don't stop this, God is going to bring his wrath here. This is not good. He called us to this. He's going to give us strength. They start to say things like, this land is exceedingly good. God will lead us. God will give it to us. Do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Protection in this passage means shadow. It's this shadow, this divine protection. And in the hot Middle Eastern desert, it was amazing to find some shade, right? And he's like, the shade's not there anymore. They're ready for us to come in and to do what God's called us to do. Imagine what it would have been like to be one of those people. Joshua and Caleb are like those coaches in those cheesy sports movies. They're in the locker room guys, this is our time. We're down by 40, but we're going to come back, And we all know that they're cheesy. None of us are sitting there this is so dramatic. This is super cheesy. But we all have a little tear in the corner of our eye by the end of it, right? And the reason is because we know it's such an uplifting story. Yeah, they made that speech, and then they went out there and they did amazing things. They're speaking faith into the lives of the nation of Israel. Now, they didn't listen to them, but they're trying. They're speaking that boldness and speaking that faith. And I wonder if we realize the power that can come from the words of a wholehearted disciple of Jesus. So many times we struggle to know how to reach people with the gospel. In our small group, we were talking about this. How do we reach people in our daily lives? And I know some people in our group, they were saying, it feels like we need to, have a Bible degree and be so fired up and have every answer ready. And I said, no, it's not about that. It's about if you're living a radical, passionate life for Jesus, that's going to itself lead to people wanting to follow him. Have you ever seen that especially in this day and age of apathy and moderation? So common in today's world that a truly passionate person can be almost unsettling. A truly passionate person walks into a room with a bunch of people in apathy and moderation, and it's almost unsettling because it changes the atmosphere of the room. And that's passion about anything, but can you imagine how that happens with wholehearted believers in Jesus? Sometimes we think that we got to kind of draw people and trick people into coming to Jesus. No, we got to be fired up, passionate, radical followers of Jesus. And believe me, I've seen it 1,000 times over. People are drawn to that because they say, what answers do you have that helps your life be like that when my life's falling apart? That is the power of the gospel. a transformed, passionate, radical follower of Jesus. It's not like we're speaking Christianese and being weird. We don't have to do that. We just be that person, and people are drawn to him, to know that God is the only answer to life's biggest questions. In the Radical book, there was a story that he told about C.T. Studd. He was a wealthy Englishman who sold everything he had to take the gospel to the nations. And he told a story about him, but he had this quote. I love this quote. So C.T. Studd said this. He said, "Too long have we been waiting for one another to begin. The time for waiting is past. Should such men as we fear? Before the whole world, before the sleepy, lukewarm, faithless, namby-pamby Christian world, we will dare to trust our God. And we will do it with this joy unspeakable, singing aloud in our hearts. We will 1,000 times sooner die trusting only in our God than live trusting in man. And when we come to this position, that battle is already won. And the end of the glorious campaign in sight, we will have the real holiness of God, not the sickly stuff of talk and dainty words and pretty thoughts. We will have a masculine holiness, one of daring faith and works for Jesus Christ." Doesn't that just fire you up? There's power when somebody's wholeheartedly passionate about God and you hear them speak, and it just leads to this passion in your own heart that says, I want that. I want to be a part of that. I want to be radical like that. His work and statements like this and his passion led to the Worldwide Evangelization Crusade, an organization and part of that impacted not only Africa but Asia and South America, and has an impact around the world because of this one man who had a passion for Jesus, and that flowed out of him into other people's lives. The third thing that happens with the wholehearted disciple of Jesus is they have a deep conviction about the character and the mission of God. If you want to turn now to Joshua, we're just going to end there. So what happened is they were sent back into the wilderness for a while, and then they came back. It's 45 years later. They still haven't taken this hardest country, this place where the descendants of Anak, these giants, are. They still haven't taken that spot yet. Caleb is 45 years older, so he was 40 before. He's 85 now, and he's there, and the land that was allotted to him, that most difficult land, he still hasn't taken it yet. But in chapter 14 here, in verse 7, he says this, "I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions, but my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said." I love this guy. 85 years old. And he says, the Lord promised this land to me. He's kept me alive. I'm still as strong today as I was back then. Like, let me at him. I'm just as vigorous, and I want to go out to the battle now, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said. I don't care if they're giants or whatever they are. I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to drive them out because God told me that's what was going to happen. I love it. He's so solid. He's centered on the mission of God. He's confident. There's a solid foundation to him that can't be shaken. He's, to some extent, so far that I was blown away by this. In Numbers 14, verse 24, I was blown away by this week. As God looked at them back 45 years earlier, right? And he looked at them and he said the nation of Israel is going to wander until everybody from that generation passed away except Caleb and Joshua. God himself said this about Caleb, Numbers 14:24. "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it." Can you imagine God saying that about you? The God of the universe that created you and designed you from the inside out Can you imagine that God who holds the universe in his hand saying, but Caleb, he has a different spirit, and he serves me wholeheartedly. Man, that's awesome. He was so rooted on the character and the mission of God that even God himself saw a different spirit in Caleb and said, that's it. That's wholehearted faith. So you might say, this is all great. I get the difference between half-hearted faith and wholehearted faith. But what's the point? Like, what are we supposed to do with that? Or why is it so important down to the end? And why is radical abandonment the sense of just no moderation, just full on whatever God you want to do in my life? I'm abandoned to you. It's all your will. It's not my own. What's the point of all of that? And it gets to this main question at the end. The main question is this: how useful are our lives in the hand of God? How useful are our lives in the hand of God? What do I mean by that? Well, this example I showed you here at the beginning. And we got the shovels here, right? Again, 2 shovels. They're both named shovel, but only one of them is actually useful. We got 2 guitars. One's really awesome, and it sounds like a dog, but it's not very useful. Like, this one is the only one that can really play music. I got 2 swords here, right? They're both called sword. But I can have a lot of fun with my kids. My kids are in here today. I could have a lot of fun. We could play this. My littlest son right now is obsessed with Bible Man, and he just takes sticks around and tries to hit everybody with them because he's obsessed with playing with it. So you can play fun games with this, but it's a play thing. If somebody's breaking into my house tonight, which one of these do I need? I don't need this. This is a play thing, right? That's for fun and games. This is the only thing that I need, right? Like, I need a real sword. So when we think about, are our lives useful in the hands of God? Are we playing Christianity? Are we playing this thing? Are we playing faith? Do we have a half-hearted faith that, yes, we come to church, yes, we try to serve, yes, we try to be nice, good people, but at the end of the day, is my life actually useful in the hands of God? If we think that this whole journey is just about being nice people, God created you. God desires for us to impact the world in ways far bigger than you and I can imagine. Like, he's waiting for people and waiting for those of us that might stop being just a plaything, just a half-hearted Christian. And he's waiting for somebody to say, God, I'm here, I'm ready for you. And at that point, he can take that real sword. He can take that real instrument. He can take that real shovel, and he can do something powerful in the world to engage every person to become a passionate follower of Jesus Christ, to change systems and to see things change. We often talk in this world today about changed systems and doing things and cultural things and social things. And every time I get so frustrated because I'm like, none of that's going to change. I don't care what politics you change. I don't care what you do. None of that's going to change until people are radically changed by the Spirit of God here, person by person, step by step, walking into our journeys. And it starts with us. Are we willing to just lay it all on the line and say, God, I'm here, whatever you want? I know there's many of us in here in this church that want that. But if you're sitting there today and maybe you've never started that journey before in your life, maybe you're here today for the first time, maybe you're watching online and you're not even a Christian yet. You don't even know what this whole thing's about. We are just so glad you're here with us. But today, right after the service, if you check in with somebody at the hospitality room, or if you're online, if you just click there and respond and talk to somebody, they'd love to walk with you through what it means to know God and to walk with him for all eternity because of the gospel. If you're here today, though, and you are wanting that, but you're just feeling this tension, God can heal that in you. You might know that thing you're holding on to. Maybe this whole time we've been talking about radical. You got one ear in, but you're trying to not fully listen because you know there's that thing you're holding on to. Financially, friendship, relationship, whatever it might be, you know there's that thing you're holding on to. You're just like, I just don't want him to have that part. Like, I'll give him everything else. I just not that part. And maybe today's the day. Again, how useful are we in the hands of God? I know for me, I don't want to just be a plaything to God. And I want to be something that can be used to change this world and be a kingdom changer.